أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajahum. Respected sisters, dear brothers, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And thank you for joining us once again in this series, which we have called the Islamic Blueprint for Understanding the World, or the Islamic teachings around knowledge acquisition. Today we are in the 8th lecture in this series, and inshallah we will try to build on where we stopped last time. There is still a lot to cover, and I don't want to spend too much time on the recap. In general, what we have covered until now is that we need to prioritize the knowledge that we acquire and be selective in how we give importance to certain types of knowledge over other types of knowledge. And we also have to tailor what is more important for us personally, in beyond what is generally beneficial to everyone. There are things that are beneficial to each and every one of us specifically because either of our circumstances or our personal needs or so on and so forth. And here we said that therefore we have to see what our religion says to prioritize, and beyond that there are general rules that we can apply to see what is the best way to prioritize knowledge. And then there are specific disciplines and types of knowledge that our religion has itself prioritized in its teachings. So we spent a little bit of time on these general rules, and we said that part of these, for instance, are that we prioritize that which is most beneficial, that is that which is most corrective for us personally, that leads to us becoming more autonomous in our thought and our actions, that we prioritize those things that allow us to discharge ourselves of our priorities, responsibilities, and duties, that it is extremely important not to stop our knowledge acquisition at that which we can consider to be superficial, but that we should be going deeper in our understanding of what we understand, that experience is one of the types of knowledge that our religion recognizes and gives importance to. We explained the 5 categories of ahkam, the 5 categories that apply to every act, every decision, every status, every situation we find ourselves in Islam. So in every act that we may perform, it falls in the categories of either being obligatory or forbidden or recommended or discouraged or being neutral. And we saw how all of these apply to our religion specifically. And we started therefore to move towards what we can call religious knowledge. Religious knowledge being the first type of specific knowledge that our religion prioritizes, emphasizes, and tells us to study. Here we said that religious knowledge falls in 2 categories. The first category is that religious knowledge is what we called foundational. Before I look at this or that specific type of religious knowledge, the type of knowledge that I may call, for instance, fiqh or Quran or seerah or akhlaq, the very specific types of religious knowledge, religion by itself is also a worldview, the foundation for everything that we learn and everything that we experience. And this is not limited to religion. This is something that every thinker and every philosopher who has looked at these types of questions related to knowledge and how we build our worldview has reached the conclusion that human beings need a worldview. You need a foundation, a lens through which you see the world. That lens does not need to be religion, but religion is certainly one such lens, that everything that you experience, everything that you learn, everything that you could think about goes through a worldview, a foundational piece of knowledge, and this is going to even lead to who you truly are, how you define yourself, how you understand your identity, how you understand your relationship with the world, with others, with knowledge, with God, and so on and so forth. And so in this case, if religion is going to be your foundational piece, then we have to understand some of the texts and some of the ways of understanding religion in this way. Not all religion is going to fit specifically into one of the tiny, small categories within religious knowledge. A lot of religious knowledge is going to be at the foundational level. This is the way through which you are going to experience life, understand life, and so on and so forth. And then after that, you start to fall in the categories, the specific, the disciplinary categories of religious knowledge. And this could be, for instance, Islamic law. This could be, the types of knowledge or the sciences of the Holy Quran, for instance, Islamic history, ethics and morality, philosophy, anything else that you may call Islamic something. These become the disciplinary ways of understanding your religion, analyzing the types of knowledge and categorizing them in a specific way. These would be specific disciplinary types of knowledge. But before getting there, we have to also understand that there is a reason why we say we start with religious knowledge. Before I see what else our religion says we should be prioritizing and studying, we should start with religion, because religion is the foundational piece of knowledge or our worldview. And so we mentioned, for instance, how Immanuel Kant, Edmund Husserl, Sellers, John Dewey, Alasdair MacIntyre, Charles Taylor, some of the philosophers who have looked at these questions in philosophy called epistemological questions of the theory of knowledge, what we can learn, what we should learn, how we should learn it, how it impacts the rest of what we learn. All of these philosophers have concluded the same thing, which is human beings need a foundational piece at the epistemological level, at the knowledge level, through which everything is experienced, everything is learned, everything is given meaning, everything is experienced in their lives. For us, if we are believers, then we say this is religion. For others, it may be something else. For us, it is religion. And most people, unless they think about these questions in this targeted, focused way, they may not be aware that they have a foundational piece. They may not even have a coherent worldview, a worldview where everything actually makes sense. Things are in cohesion. They are not in contradiction within their worldview. This is what we believe our religion gives us. Not only is it a worldview among other worldviews, we believe it is the only worldview that can give you a complete worldview for the fullness of human experience. This is a very different way of understanding what religion can provide as opposed to any other worldview. In any case, so all of this we covered until now. Then we quickly spoke about some of the more recent trends in Islamic law and some of the scholarship in Islamic theory looking at Islamic law or the philosophy of Islamic law and how it has been prioritizing increasingly priorities. So different ways, different aspects, different currents and movements, all of them leading to focusing on identifying, determining what are the priorities within religion, within Islamic law, within every verdict. What are the priorities? How do I determine what the priorities are? How do I ensure that all of the teachings in religion are in harmony and balance with each other? How do I identify what is the greater interest, the smaller interest, the greater harm, the smaller harm? And I do this calculation to give priority to the right thing over other things. How do I determine that? How does that play and have basically a domino effect, a downstream effect on every other category or verdict of Islamic teachings? And so we mentioned 4 recent trends in Islamic scholarship. Fiqh al-Maqasid. So this is the fiqh that is perhaps the most popular among these, that tries to specialize and focus on the higher objectives of religion and tries to reinterpret everything in religion as being a derived out of, so a derivative of, and leading back to the highest objectives and principles within religion. And we said here the scholars differ on whether these are perhaps 5 or 7 or more or less. Fiqhul muwazanat, so this is the Islamic jurisprudence or the philosophy of law that focuses on balancing between different priorities, giving them different weight, different values. Fiqhul awlawiyat, this is the fiqh that tries to determine what comes before something else. What takes precedence? What is more of a priority over something else? And then finally, fiqhul maslaha. What are the greater interests and therefore harms? And how do I weigh them appropriately, give the right value to each, so that when I make my verdict, when I reach my conclusion religiously, I have given the proper weight to every type of issue and problem and question I am addressing. Then we spoke quickly about the distinction between Islam and Iman, simply saying that Islam is entering into this religion at the superficial level. Superficial not meaning in a derogatory or negative way, simply saying this is the external, outward layer of our religion, and it includes, saying the words, I have entered into this religion, proclaiming the Shahada, bearing witness that there is no God and that Muhammad is his prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then applying those teachings, as rituals. So I fast, I recite the Quran, I perform the pilgrimage, and so on and so forth. This is the external layer of our religion. This is not what is happening in the heart. This is not what is happening in the soul. Iman refers to what is happening in the soul. This is belief and faith. And we saw in the scriptures how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards and punishes based on what is happening in the heart and in the soul. As for what is happening outwardly, this is in order so that human beings can be able to cohabit together, live together, have a social system, have a legal system, have an economic system, have a political system, because this is what human beings need in this world, and it is the foundation for what we need in the afterlife, but only the first step. We need to go a lot further, and our religion goes a lot further, but many of us unfortunately stay stuck at the outward, superficial first layer of our religion, thinking that this is all that it has to offer. Then we moved to religious knowledge, and now we want to start talking about, so this is kind of the transition piece. We want to talk about beliefs, and beliefs start with knowledge of God. And we said in the case of knowledge of God, while we are presenting it within a specific type of knowledge, so now we are speaking as a discipline, so we are within a discipline, this type of knowledge, when we go through it, we can look at it as kalam, theology, aqidah, creed, but in truth, this is what is giving us our foundation. Right? So now that we are this is to give the concrete, specific application example of what we have been talking about. We're going to see that this is in full application of religious knowledge, but in fact, it's religious knowledge that gives you your worldview. It makes you able to interpret and understand the world. And today, inshallah, this is where we left off, so we're going to continue with that. I'm not going to go through the passages that we already went through. We spoke about how the Holy Prophet ﷺ says that the most important type of knowledge, your worth, your value, your true merit as a human being is based on what the Holy Prophet referred to as ma'rifah. And ma'rifah is ma'rifah of God. It's a knowledge of God. This is the summary of all ma'rifah. Everything else stems from there and is given value to that. So when he says the best of you is the one who has or who is best in ma'rifah, and ma'rifah is ma'rifah of God, this means that this becomes the foundational layer. Everything else depends on this, conditional upon this. We spoke about this hadith from Imam Rida alayhi salam, in which he says that someone came to the Holy Prophet and he asked him about knowledge, and the Holy Prophet once again returned the man to knowledge of God. We went through passages from the first sermon of Nahj al-Balagha from Imam Ali alayhi salam, and we saw the descriptions that the Imam is giving. And here we are going deeper and deeper in the passages to see how now the Imam here is presenting not only to know God, but what does it mean to know God? So one, you have to know that there is a God, okay? So you believe in, so believing is already one layer further. You believe in this idea, this notion, this concept of God, but then you have to go a lot further in defining it for yourself. What does God mean to you? And here we gave one passage from Imam Ali alayhi salam. That's the reason we went into those details. Because that passage, Imam Ali alayhi salam is going quite far in making sure we have a specific type of definition of God as opposed to another. And we talked about this to say that a lot of what has happened in humanity is not that human beings have said there is no God. A lot of the differences between human beings is that they have had a different notion of what that God is. It's one thing to say God exists or not, is another to say, what God are we talking about? What are the attributes of that God? How are you defining God? And the example I always use is it the old man with the big white beard in the clouds? Is that your God? Because if that's your notion of God, this will be the foundational piece. This will lead you somewhere very different than the God I believe in, who is absolute, who is transcendent, who is infinite in an absolute way. This is a very different notion. This is a very different notion than, for instance, what the Quran says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There is nothing like him. So everything that I think of that is perhaps like something I know in this world, the Quran is telling me there's a general principle. This is not God you're thinking about. God is beyond that. God is transcendent. You're thinking about imminent things, things that are accessible to you. They're material, they're limited, they're temporal. They have a beginning and an end. They have dimensions, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we went through these passages to reach and end with these conclusions. Without going into detail here, if we wanted to, and we had a lot more time in this series, then we would go in the details of when we say, therefore, we have to know God. If the first type of knowledge our religion says to go learn is knowledge of God, how do I learn about God? So in short, our religion says there are 3 ways to know God. You can consider each one of them independent, or you can say that they build on each other to have the fullness of the picture. So the first way, the simplest, most accessible, easiest way to know about God is to know about the world. Because the world is considered to be a sign of God, a trace of God, an output, a product of God. Just like when we say, for instance, I want to understand who a certain author is, I may study their works. Their works are going to give me an idea of who this person is. What is their intelligence? What is their ability? How do they think? How do they write? It's going to give me some of their traits, some of their characteristics. And this applies to everyone and everything in life. When someone designs something, it is a representation of who they are. Especially when you say that this is a creation of. This world is a creation of God. And that's why we see so much insistence, and we will come back to this later in the series. Why does the Quran say, go study the world? It's not a choice. This is not a luxury. The Quran is saying this is one of the best ways to get to know God. Go study the world. The better you understand the world, the complexity, the accuracy, how it is put together, you better understand that God has wisdom, that God has power, that God has knowledge, that God has mercy, because you're going to encounter this in the world. It's one thing to think about these things in an abstract way. It's another to see examples, applications, instances, occurrences of these things in the world. So when you encounter them, it starts to make it real for you because you're experiencing these things. You're going to say they have to come from somewhere. Someone created these and created these in this way and created them in a way that is understandable to me. And this brings us to the self. That our religion says, study your own self, understand your own self, get to know your own self, The better the better you know yourself, the better you will know your God, your Lord. And we will come back to that perhaps later in the series, depending on the time we have. I think this is a hadith or a few hadith very worth at least commenting on quickly. من عرف نفسه عرف ربه أعرفكم بنفسه أعرفكم بربه, and so on and so forth. The one who knows his self the best or the most knows their Lord the most. Why? How? What is contained in this self that it leads me back to God directly? In any case, so that's the self, and then you have the scriptures. So another way to study God, if you have truly reached the conclusion that what you are looking at is a scripture, this is God telling you about himself, then this is a valid, easy way to understand who God is, to have knowledge of God. God is telling you, this is who I am. This is how I will help you understand who I am. So the scripture itself, I can look at the world and study it by itself. I can look at myself and study myself by itself. And I can study scripture directly. I can study the Holy Quran. I can study the ahadith to see what do they say about God. And of course, I can combine all of these. And combining them is going to give me the most complete picture, the best understanding that I can of God. Are there other ways? There are, but we keep them to another time. These are the main ones. So this is where we left things off. Inshallah, today I want to complete this. So first, what do we mean when we say that knowledge of God is foundational? So first, to use now a slightly more secular philosophical language. First, it's called the interpretive horizon. I think horizon is clear to us. We know what a horizon is. When you look afar, you see a certain line. This is the furthest point here that you can see when you look at the world. This is your horizon. How far can you go with your sight? This is your horizon. An interpretive horizon is this idea applied to how far can we go when we understand things in the world. When I try to understand and make sense of the world, how far can I go with my mind, with the sight of my mind? What is that horizon? What does it look like? So here, for instance, questions like, why is there something instead of nothing? That's a huge question in philosophy. Philosophy is still struggling with these questions. Depending on how you answer this question, you are going to have a completely different experience of life. Why is there a reality? Or is there a reality? Is the world in which we live in real or not? I assure you there's very real, serious conversations about whether the world is real or it's a matrix. It's all an illusion. You have to be able to resolve these questions before you build your worldview. And if you stay in a state of limbo here and you don't have an answer to these questions, you will never have a worldview. And you will not be able to commit one way or another in your life. How am I supposed to live? Am I supposed to live in a specific way or not? If it's all a hallucination and an illusion, why bother? Is everything in this world, is it intentional or is it an accident? Is it supposed to be this way? Or did it randomly get to this state? And then, me personally, why am I here? But I can't get to this question, let alone answer this question, before I resolve the questions before. Where did I come from? Where am I going? And what am I doing here? And then the answers to these questions become your foundation for things like, do you believe in ethics? Do you believe in morality? Is there right and wrong, good and bad, or not? Well, it depends. What did you answer to these questions first? If you want to have a political theory, if you want to believe in something like science, if you want to say, I have an experience of something called reality, all of this depends on how you answered these questions first. So for instance, in Sources of the Self, Charles Taylor, now you saw his You're going to see sometimes his name here and there. I've read a lot of Charles Taylor because he spent a lot of time focused on the philosophy of religion. He's a very old man now. He's written a lot. And he's a Canadian philosopher, by the way. So in Sources of the Self, inescapable framework that condition all moral and existential reasoning. He says that there are certain things that you have to figure out and they become your framework. And then everything else, these become the condition to what he says, all moral and existential reasoning. Any thought you have, any experience you have is going to go through this filter. That is your foundation. Dilti or diltai, worldviews. He is the one who talked about worldviews as what we are calling here total interpretive systems. Whatever you're interpreting, whatever you're trying to find meaning to is going through something. That something is your worldview. Then, reconfigures the meaning of the self. So here, we say religion is going to provide this answer, just like it did for the first one. Religion is going to give me my interpretive horizon. Religion is going to reconfigure the meaning of the self. So for instance, I believe, because I'm a believer, I have a theocentric worldview, so a worldview that has God in the center, theocentric. I believe that myself is received. It comes from somewhere. It comes from God. Not everybody believes that their self is received. And that's why in the existentialist currents and philosophies, they say the self is constructed. There is no such thing as the self that is given to you. You decide. Society decides. Biology decides what the self is. Nothing is received. Right? So, and not invented. I believe that myself is relational. It doesn't live in a vacuum. It's constantly in a relationship with. So in my case, I'm a believer in God. It's constantly in a relationship with God. And the relationship is that I'm a creature and He's a creator. I'm a servant and He's a Lord. That relationship never goes away. No matter what I experience, it is experienced with that in mind. And therefore, this is going to give me a moral order. There is a superior and an inferior. There's a top and a bottom. And this will mean that I have to act in a certain way. There is a right way to act and a wrong way to act. There is real good and real objective bad and evil. That's actually a thing outside of me. I'm not constructing this. And therefore, if that's all true, then I am accountable. I'm responsible for my actions. It means something if I decide to do right and wrong. If I to do justice or injustice, that means something. Therefore, I'm accountable. And I'm accountable beyond social factors, beyond genetic factors. It's not only because society said so, or I was raised in a certain way that something becomes right and wrong. Or I have a genetic predisposition that it becomes right and wrong. I'm more accountable as a human being than that. Or, I don't believe in all of this, then I have to believe that the self is constructed. It's a construction. It could be something else. How I think, how I experience life, how, all of that is a construction. And it could have been something different. It just happens to be this now. Put me in a different context with different circumstances and myself will be something completely different. And there's no meaning and there's no direction. I'm not headed anywhere specific. Myself is completely aimless. There's no meaning to the self itself, that I have a self and that self is going in a specific direction. All of that goes away if it's not theocentric. More. It grounds ethics. And I spoke about this a couple of times. What is the ground for your ethics? As a believer, the ground of my ethics is my religion. That's one more way my religion is foundational. And what do we mean by ethics? We mean that, do you believe that there's an objective right and wrong outside of you? Or is this something that human beings get together and agree on? Today we decide that theft is bad. Tomorrow we might decide, we vote on, for instance, that theft is good. Injustice is good or injustice is bad. Do we vote on that? Can we change our minds about it? Or do we say that it has an objective reality outside of us? If there is an objective reality outside of you, then it's not a construction. Where did that come from? Why am I wired in this way as a human being to think about this? I don't think animals are sitting together having these philosophical debates. We are. And if I do something and I know that it's wrong, I'm going to have to live with guilt. To us, are animals living with guilt? Does that notion come? And do we feel like they have an existential crisis around this? It doesn't seem so. We seem to be the ones stuck with this. The question is not that it's there. It's why is it there? Why do I have to think about this? Why am I wired in a way that makes me think about right and wrong? And what's the foundation of it? If it's not me, where is it? Where does the idea of right and wrong come from? What is the ground for my ethics? To me, it's very easy. I have religion. I am a believer in a theocentric world. A worldview that has God in the center. So God gives me one more way. He's foundational. It's the person who doesn't have God that has to explain to me, where does their ethics come from? If you don't believe in God, is it just because we agreed? Is it just because today we decided to make it into a law? Or do we believe that human beings intrinsically understand this? And if they do, bring me back to the self. Why is it this way? Why do I, as a human being, have to deal with this right and wrong? Where does it come from? And here, yes, I wrote about Kant. So in the theories that are secular, non-theocentric, for instance, good and bad become a matter of consensus or utility, so utilitarian theories. So the greatest benefit to the greater number of people, that's utility. Or it's a matter of power. Whoever has the more power will decide what is right and wrong and impose it on others, usually for their own self-interest. Or it's a byproduct of evolution. And this is very problematic because evolutionary theory cannot really explain this. But those who believe strongly in evolutionary theory try to explain everything through evolutionary theory. And at the end of all of this, there is the notion of oughtness. That you ought to behave in a certain way. That you should behave in a certain way. That cannot emerge from a non-theocentric worldview. And so, of course, Kant has a whole theory. I don't have time to go through it right now, what he calls the imperative, moral imperative or categorical imperative, which means that you have to do the right thing because it is the right thing to do. Not because it's utilitarian and not because it's a matter of consensus and not because the law says you have to do the right thing as a human being because you are a human being and it is the right thing to do. Why? What's the foundation of all of this? Right? In any case. Or, as Dostoevsky writes in one of his works, if God does not exist, then everything is permitted. There's no God. Meaning for evil and suffering. So do you live in a world that you recognize that there is evil and suffering and pain and hardship or not? Human beings, generally speaking, all agree that there is. So how do you explain that? The person who has a theocentric worldview will say that this evil and this suffering and this pain and these hardships are there with a purpose. This is not random. This is not a mistake. They are there with purpose. They are part of the design. They are part of the intent. They have meaning. For instance, they are soul-making. This is what allows your soul to become what it is, to achieve its highest potential, to go through hardships, to be exposed to evil, to deal with it in this world. This is a soul-making argument. And you believe in justice. You believe that justice will be restored, not in this world, in the next, but justice will be restored. This is a theocentric worldview. What if you don't have a theocentric worldview? Then you believe suffering is meaningless. It's just something that's there, and you have to go through it without any reason, randomly there. The consolation is merely psychological. If there is any consolation, if there are any ways to make it work, the consolation is that you trick yourself so that you can forget about it, overlook it, deal with it, because you're stuck with it. But it doesn't really have meaning. It doesn't have purpose. You can't really objectively explain it to yourself. And then finally, you reach the conclusion where, if you want to be truthful and honest with yourself about it, then your being and being itself is absurd. It's without meaning, which is what you find in Camus and other philosophers who have gone all the way there, right? Existentialism has various currents. Some of them believe in God, like Kierkegaard, and some of them don't go very far in the absurdity. They stop short, like Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre, who will say, for instance, that we are atheists and the human being has to create their own reality, and however is your lived experience, that's your world. Nothing else matters. Your ideas don't matter. It's your lived experience. And then you have Albert Camus and others who go all the way and say that being itself is absurd, the absurdity of being. And the myth of Sisyphus, as I have spoken about in the past, is his work and his idea and his reference, right? That your existence is entirely absurd, meaningless, without purpose, without direction, and so on and so forth. And then, one more way that knowledge of God and theocentrism is foundational is knowledge itself. For me, as a believer in God, I believe that when I think and I have intellectual activity, when I look at the world, for instance, I'm trying to discover an intelligible order. I believe that there is an order outside of me placed in the world because the world has design and intelligence and wisdom and purpose and meaning. All I'm trying to do is to discover it. I believe there are laws that God has put in place in the world. My job is simply to go discover them. The more I work my mind intellectually, the better I am able to discover these laws. That's the world I live in. So truth, what is truth? It's conformity and realism. So that what is in my mind matches what is in reality. I believe there's an external reality and I'm trying to uncover it, and then what I have as an image in my mind matches that reality. So there's conformity. And finally, that there is coherence. All of these things actually make sense together. They don't contradict each other. The different parts, the different types of knowledge, things that I discover, all of them are part of one system, one whole, one creation, a single entity where everything is based on the same laws, the same principles, the same rules. By the way, just as a open-close bracket quickly, isn't this the entirety of the system of science? All the greatest minds in science, are they not trying to work towards the unified theory? Where all of the laws and principles of science and mathematics finally converge into one thing. Because nothing else makes sense. Science does not make sense any other way. If you look at all of existence and you look at one piece of it and you start making sense of it with certain principles and laws, and then you look somewhere else and you come up with principles and laws to be able to understand and predict what's going on there, those two are in reality the same thing. And so you have to find a principle that makes both work even though they don't seem to be connected. And that's why with time they are able to say, in reality there are only a few forces at play here. And everything that we see, everything we witness, experience, everything that makes the world work is simply instances of these forces, these four forces. And in fact, there is a way to start combining these forces together. And ultimately, the aim would be that all of these four big forces become one. We find one equation, one set of principles and rules out of which everything can be derived. Those who are interested in the philosophy of science and what the greatest minds in science have worked on for a long time, this is all they're interested in. Einstein and others' obsessive search for the unified theory. Not this or that specific set of rules and laws and principles. How do I bring all of these back together into one? Then I will have a coherent whole. Then everything will make sense. Because what is happening in the atom and what is happening in the cell and what is happening in chemistry and biology and physics and at the level of the galaxy is also happening in the atom. This is one universe, one whole. Right now I'm stuck because I have quantum physics with its own set of rules and principles and realities, and I have what's happening beyond quantum physics. So I have incoherence. There's a gap. But the true scientist says, and I have to find a way to bridge that gap because I know they are one. We live in the world where everything is one. I know they are one. My mind hasn't been able to discover it. But there's order in it. There are laws. There are constants, principles. It's not random. Where did it come from? In any case, so all of this would be, for me, my foundational knowledge. And then, on the other side, those who do not have a theocentric worldview, there is no God at the center, then knowledge is instrumental and functional. It's something that comes and goes. You use it as you need it, but you're not necessarily discovering anything outside of you because there is nothing to discover. I am random, the result of blind randomness, and the world is the result of blind randomness. What am I trying to uncover? It's evolutionary. It's only the result of blind mechanisms of evolution. And here again, the issue with evolution is not evolution. The issue of evolution is there a driving force behind it or not? If there is, what's your explanation for it? Is it the materialist explanation or back to square one? Or do you say there is more and it has purpose and it has a direction and it has meaning and blind matter does not create that for itself? And is it a world that is unintelligible or not? Is it a world that is reality or not? Unintelligible means that whatever the world is, I do not have the capacity to understand it and make sense of it. I think I have been given the capacity to understand the world, to uncover its laws. It didn't have to be this way. Why do I have a capacity to understand things outside of me in this way? To come up with this whole field we call math, and this whole field we call physics, this whole field we call biology, and the principles and laws and rules and constants behind each one of these. Why? Why can I make sense of this? Why can I uncover the order behind it? Where does this come from? So this is intelligibility. That I have the capacity to make sense of the world. I believe my way, my worldview, is the only one that allows me to say the world is intelligible. No one else is allowed, certainly not the atheist, certainly not the materialist, is allowed to say the world has order and I will be able to discover that order because it is intelligible to me and stay coherent. It's incoherence. It's a gigantic leap for them, philosophically, intellectually. They're not allowed to make that leap. I have the foundation that makes it valid for me. They don't. So it's an incoherence for them to say this. And that's why I was hoping I wrote it. I'm happy that I did. I advise to read this book for those who are interested in this. It's called Mind and Cosmos. And so he focuses on, he's certainly not saying, I believe in God, this author, by the way. He's simply saying that when I look at my reason, my ability to make the world intelligible to me, to make sense of the world, when I look at my ability or the reality that I have consciousness, that I know that I exist, and that I'm able to think about my own consciousness, this is not random. This is not simple. And then that there are objective values. There are things outside of me that I am discovering. And I know here I made a mistake. I have to go back and think more and fix it. All of that, when he puts it together, he says, therefore, a materialist worldview makes no sense. It's incoherent. It's full of contradictions. At least when you say, I believe in God, and He created me in this way, and He created the world in this way, and He made it just so that I understand all of this and I can discover it, and the more I discover, it leads me back to Him, at least that is coherent. Regardless of whether it's true or not, it's coherent. Philosophically valid. There is no logical contradictions, no gaps in this thinking. The gap is not believing in this foundational piece. Life and death. The reason I mention life and death specifically, even though it should be included in everything we just talked about, this is one more foundational piece. Because maybe the other pieces are very abstract for human beings. Life and death is what we all live through. We are born in this world. The longer we live, the better we start to understand what life is, even though no human being can define it, and that this will end. At some point, we stop living. That by itself is an extremely deep, real, serious experience for the human being. Whether you are the one going through it, or whether you witness others going through it, this is extremely serious for the human being. Life and death. And the Quran makes this a big deal too, by the way. The Quran which says, الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ. To summarize your entire being, he says God is the one, تَبَارَكَ الَّذِي, bless is the one who, in Surah Tabarak, in verse 2 he says, the one who created death and life. So here, again, for the person who has a theocentric worldview, if this is the deepest experience for the human being, life and death. For the theocentric, the person who has God as the center of the worldview, my experience, my understanding, the meaning that I give, my interpretation of life and death is a completely different understanding and interpretation and experience than the one who does not have a theocentric worldview with a God in the middle. I believe, for instance, that this world of mine is starting somewhere and headed somewhere. There's a trajectory. I'm following that trajectory. I'm on a journey. Right now, I'm at this point in the journey. It doesn't end here. Death is a transition to me. I'm simply moving on from one station to another, from this world to the next. Not everything ends. Everything doesn't end. In fact, this is just the beginning. This is a very small part of a very long existence awaiting me. This is very small, very quick, and I transition through death to the next piece, to the next part. And actions acquire eternal weight. So whatever I do now, it may seem simple, it may look like it's quick, it may look like it takes me 1 minute to do, 1 second to do, whether it is incredible good or incredible evil. Here it looks like it was done quickly, took an instant to do. But because of this worldview, I feel every time I act that this act carries an eternal weight. This is going to be part of me. And me is not going anywhere. I'm simply moving on from this chapter to the next. So it carries an eternal weight. Very different from the person who thinks everything ends the moment I die. Very different. Their understanding of life and death is extremely different. Their accountability, extremely different. Their understanding of ethics, extremely different. If they actually believe that everything ends the moment I die. So to this person, if they want to be entirely and absolutely coherent with themselves, they should be saying death is absolute annihilation for them. The I ceases to exist. There is no more I after you die. That's one. And then life is brief. Life is random. Life is meaningless. Biochemistry. Nothing else. This is how they should, if they are truly consistent and coherent as a materialist, view their life and their death. And they should therefore live their life accordingly. And perhaps they do. Otherwise, they're not coherent. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. And so, there are philosophers here very quickly. I mentioned Heidegger. Perhaps Martin Heidegger is the philosopher who called the human being, that's one way he calls him the Dasein. The Dasein translates maybe one way into the being towards death. He says whether the human being realizes it or not, once they reach their intellectual maturity in life, everything a human being does, every state, every decision, really is driven by a very clear understanding that everything they're doing is just movement towards death. His entire philosophy is based on understanding the human being's relationship with death. Martin Heidegger. Perhaps the greatest or one of the greatest philosophers of his time. And then you have philosophers like Epicurus and those who have followed in his footsteps. He openly used to say, death as nothingness. Death is nothing to us, he used to say. Because he says that for something to be evil is entirely based on how it makes me feel. And for something to be good is entirely dependent on how it makes me feel. That's why they say he's the first true materialist. Everything is how it makes me feel. So if death means I feel nothing, I no longer exist, then, he says, death is nothing to us. I don't need to worry about that. I won't be here to deal with it. When I die and everything ends. So death is nothing to us. So death is the absence of sensation and it cannot harm us. So all of this to say, when we say that religious knowledge is foundational, we're saying that your entire trajectory of being, all of your states, all of your experience, all of your knowledge, everything you could think of, whatever you think of, identity, ethics, purpose, suffering, knowledge, community, hope, is entirely defined by your worldview. And to have a theocentric worldview, to have a worldview that has God in the middle, is a very different worldview than to have a non-theocentric worldview. A worldview where there is no God. And the only consistent alternative, by the way, is a materialist worldview. There's nothing in between. Unless you say, I don't know. You want to be agnostic somewhere, that's up to you. Hopefully you'll know soon. You'll land somewhere. You can't keep living in limbo. You have to commit. What a wasted life to continue living in limbo for decades and decades. At some point you have to decide, how am I living? And that's why a lot of thinkers and philosophers have said the decision is actually inescapable. One way or another, you are deciding, you are committing, you are living in a certain way. Whether you say it and are conscious of it and own it or not, you are living in a certain way, that's one. And two, because the decision is inevitable, inescapable, no matter what, you are deciding to live in a certain way. That's why some philosophers have said, just like Blaise Pascal and others, let's just do a wager. Let's pretend. How about I just live a life of pretend? Let's pretend there is a God. At least I will have a consistent and safe worldview. It's coherent and it's safe. No matter what happens, I did the right thing because I lived as though there is a God. I did the right thing as though there is a God. Of course, to us that's falling way short. That's not enough. That's not real belief. But at least you can respect this person's coherence. They are being coherent. Logically, intellectually, philosophically, this is coherent. This is a valid position. To say I'm unable to achieve the result I want to achieve, so then what's the next best thing? So they say, live as though. Blaise Pascal says, I don't know. So I'm going to present this argument, the wager, Pascal's wager. If we are right and they are wrong, then we have won and they have lost. And if we are wrong and they are right, we've lost nothing. It's our life. And everything ends when we die anyways. So everything stops here. By the way, Imam al-Sadiq has the same argument if you go back. Walking beside the Kaaba, the Zanadiq, the heretics used to come and the Imam gave this answer. Because they were making fun of the people who were performing the pilgrimage at the time of Imam al-Sadiq. So the Imam gave this exact answer. He told him, if we are right and you are wrong, and we are right, the Imam said, then we have won and you have lost. And if you are right and we are wrong, and it is not the case, the Imam said, then none of us has lost anything or won anything. So what's the logical thing to do? At least live as though we are right and there is a God and He has ordered all of this. At least be consistent in this way. In any case, that wraps up the topic of the foundational understanding of religion. I think it's worth at least completing the topic around the oneness of God. I think this one can be very quick. So the logical next step from everything that we have said is to say that not only do we believe that there is a God, but that there is one God. And this oneness goes way beyond a numerical number. And so we see that in our religion, there is also an insistence on understanding that there is God, to have knowledge of God, to have knowledge of the type of God, this is what we just talked about, and to also know that He is one. Why? So this is just a quick comment on that. Why is it so important in our religion, this notion of oneness? In short, Our religion basically says that while it starts from the essence of God, that in His essence God is one, it actually touches on every aspect of human life. So how does this work? We start with that God is one. In His nature, God is one. He is simple. Simple meaning that He is not made up of parts. So it's a philosophical simplicity, not simple as in any case. Not the derogatory, negative understanding of what simple could mean. I've talked about this in the past and people had questions. Simplicity is philosophical simplicity, that God is not made up of parts. He is one. Absolutely simple. That's the meaning of simple. Without any partner, without any equal, no one else participates with Him in any way, shape, or form, so no associates. And that's why we say that God is absolute. And this is referred to in multiple ways. We have it in the Holy Quran, we have it in the narrations. The Holy Quran, when it says As-Samad, Qul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu as-Samad, that He is, Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam says, He is al-Ajwaf, that there is nothing empty in Him, right? Or He's absolute in that there cannot be any dependence. If there cannot be any dependence, there cannot be any effect that changes. He is always stable, fixed, non-changing. So He is absolute. Okay? In any case. So that's at the level of the essence of God. From the essence of God, you move to the attributes of God. In what way are all the attributes one? Human beings, to understand God, analyze God, and they need attributes so that they can focus on one aspect of God, one dimension of God, this one or that one. But God ultimately is one. God is not made up of different attributes. And that was a question that we had last week. What do we mean by the accident and the substance? Right? That there are things that change and there are things that remain the same. That's for us. For me, I may one day be strong and one day be weak. Something may be one day white and one day black. This does not apply to God, because the things of this world are made up of parts. And those parts, some of them are just notions that don't exist in the outside world. And that's when some of you were laughing last week when I say, what defines the chairness of a chair or the whiteness of something that is white? White does not exist in the real world. You cannot point to something and say this is whiteness. You can only point to things that exist that can carry whiteness. But whiteness itself does not exist. So they're called accidents. Attributes are in this way. By themselves on their own, God is not equal to knowledge, for instance. You cannot say God is knowledge and knowledge is God. No, not in that way. Because sometimes we hear that all of God is knowledge. God is entirely knowledge. God is entirely power. God is entirely life. Yes, but this is metaphorical language. And it doesn't go both ways. It's not life equals God and God equals life. It's not in that way. It's that God is a simple concept and a simple entity, not made up of parts. But we human beings need those parts, those dimensions, those angles to make sense of God and to make sense of the world. We cannot comprehend God as He is in Himself, as He truly is. So there is a layer of attributes. Then we move to the actions of God. And we say that all true agency, anything that truly happens in the world, must derive out of God. Nothing can happen in the world unless it is an act of God or a power given by God for an act to happen. And this is extremely important. And by the way, it goes back to the foundational knowledge. Inshallah, that part is clear. Okay, so God's agency and agency in the world. Agency meaning the ability to do something, to change the world, to act on the world. Okay, so do we notice that there is agency in the world? Yes. Fire burns. When I drink water, I feel that my thirst is quenched. Water has agency. It's affecting me. It's performing an act. It has an effect. Where does that effect come from? Why does fire burn? Where does that come from? Why does anything do anything? That question brings us back to the question of agency. Where does agency come from? The ability to act on. Where does it come from? So this is a direct derivation. We derive it directly out of the oneness of God. The oneness of God in His essence. We explained it. Attributes. We explained it in act. Everything that exists that has agency, the agency is either the agency of God directly or derived. God is giving agency so that other entities have agency. Okay, so this is still oneness. And then we move to lordship. If that is the case, then God alone is worthy of worship. If I understand where I fit into this system of being, then I have to have a specific relationship with this God. This is derived directly out of His oneness, out of His absoluteness, out of His singularity, out of His uniqueness. This relationship is a relationship of a servant to a Lord, a creature to a creator, which equals, in our religious speech, our religious wording, worship. This is how it should manifest itself in my life, that I worship God, that I serve God, that I do as He wishes me to do. That's the only logical conclusion, if everything I have said until now is true. And so, of course, here is where we can go into a lot more detail, but I don't have time for this right now, to say, for instance, that He is a creator. That puts me in a specific relationship. When I say He is the sustainer, that puts me in a different relationship. When I say that God is the ultimate governor, that puts me in a different relationship. But all of these derive out of each other. So He gives life, He gives death, He decrees, He measures, He decides what happens in this world and how it happens and when it happens and to what extent and what volume and what intensity. In everything, in every little atom, aspect, dimension of this world. That's all lordship. Which brings us to the next level. If that is the case, then God alone is the one who has true sovereignty. Sovereignty means to have power to say, do and don't do. Today, when you hear about a state, they say that a state is sovereign, or it wants to maintain its sovereignty, or its sovereignty is being attacked. What do we mean by that? That it has full independence and the right to dictate how to be. What gives it that right? Where does that right come from? Is it just by itself on its own? When I talk about the state, it's a matter of consensus. Human beings have agreed on a certain political order. So they have accepted to give sovereignty. This is not real sovereignty. It can collapse in a second. So this is not an objective sovereignty. It's not out there in the world. It's human beings who create it together, agree on it. God's sovereignty is not like that. So God is the only one who has true sovereignty to say, do, don't do. And it's legitimate and it's binding. Any other do and don't do has to derive out of this. If it does not, it's not part of the system of oneness of God. Can it exist? Sure. Human beings can agree. We can all agree together that, I don't know, if I put a certain color up right now, it means I'm hungry. And if I put another color, it means I'm not hungry. And I say, do you guys agree on this? And you say, yes, we agree on this. That's it, we agreed. And this gives legitimacy to the system of colors. Does this exist in the real world? No. We decided, and we can decide something different. But legitimacy in the case of God is not like that. If He is truly the only creator, the only sustainer, the only governor, the only one who has agency, then he is the only one with true sovereignty. And this is where we see this notion of tashri' or shara', that there is legislation, there is law that comes from God. This is what we mean. And how it applies in every aspect of life. And so this becomes here the standard or the ground for justice, law, moral, ethical, legal systems. And then, of course, this leads to worship and devotion and worthiness of worship, that he is to be worshipped in a specific way, the way he wants to be worshipped or not. He could have chosen not to be worshipped in a specific way. Or if he does, then that's up to him too. And we believe, by the way, here, that's last point, we didn't talk a lot about the systems of reality, but we believe that, therefore, if God says, worship me in a specific way, then that worship is going to be aligned with the rest of the reality he has created. It's like you're aligning yourself with the cosmos, with the forces, with the principles, with the laws, with everything that God has created as part of that system. You're the only piece left. You're the one that still has freedom to decide, do I also align myself with everything else in the universe or not? Because you're a special entity and you've been given more freedom than other entities. Other entities do as they're supposed to. You also do in a lot of ways as you're supposed to. But where you are given freedom, you get to choose. Do I actually do as I'm supposed to do or not? In other words, do I align with everything else in creation or not? Do I become part of the one system or not? The system that derives out of the oneness of God or not? That's worship. And so I'll wrap it up with this. To wrap up all of this, there's a saying from Imam Ali alayhi salam. He says, رحم الله امرئ عرف من أين وفي أين وإلى أين. And وفي أين is not written for some reason. I apologize. رحم الله امرئ عرف من أين وفي أين وإلى أين. May God have mercy on the person who knows from where and where right now and to where, towards where, or where to. It's a very brief, very short saying. But this saying is the entirety of the discussion we just had on the worldview. In the past, I've given an entire series on the worldview being 3 questions. Where do I come from? What am I doing here? And where am I going? These are the 3 questions. And Imam Ali alayhi salam says, رحم الله امرئ. You want to work on something? Work on this. This is your full humanity. Know where did you come from? What are you doing here? And where are you going? There's nothing else beyond this. The last piece was simply to say that as part of the foundational, history has shown that God is not a self-explanatory concept. And depending on what type of God people believe in, depending on whether you think God is finite or infinite, God is one or multiple, that He is transcendent or immanent, is He truly all-powerful, does He have full free will or not, is He all-knowing, is He just or not, and other questions, you end up in a completely different place, even if you believe in God, right? Depending on the answers you have to these questions. And the issue is that you also end up with contradictions or falsehoods or nonsense. And this is when people realize what I'm believing in is not even convincing to me. It seems to be contradictory. It's weak. There are issues with what I believe in. And so they turn away because of a lack of understanding of God. They focus on other aspects before this one. This one remains unresolved, and with time, the issues, the weaknesses, the contradictions start to become clear to them, or it becomes completely irrelevant. And And yes, so it will affect later, when that happens, it will affect the rest of, and that's why we say it's foundational. It will start affecting every other aspect. Every piece of knowledge, every experience in life, every decision you make, the foundation is changing. So for instance, existence and causality. The idea of existence. How you understand cause and effect in the world changes, whether you believe there is a God or not. Knowledge and coherence of reality, authority and sovereignty, worship and obedience, prophethood and religion, morality, afterlife, and the list goes on. So this is all to say, this is what we meant when we said that religion has a foundational piece, and that foundational piece derives directly out of the notion of God, the attributes of God, the oneness of God. There is another discussion we won't have. I thought I had something on it. I don't. Lucky you, and it's getting late. But it was simply to say, in our religion, there is a lot of insistence on this notion of oneness and to return back to God, the true God. Why? So there is a clear, inshallah, answer that we just gave. There is a second answer that is important, which is our religion is saying that it wants people to believe in, to truly understand and believe in truth. Don't base and found your entire existence and all of your life decisions on untruth, on falsehood, on things that are groundless. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is focusing on this. And if you read the Quran carefully, you see this is repeated again and again. A huge part of the Quran is to establish that one thing that will become clear to human beings in the afterlife is وَيَعْلَمُونَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْحَقِّ الْحَقُّ الْمُبِينَ, so that they may know that it is God who is truly al-haq, truth. Not believing in this means you're creating your own order, your own version of a reality that is baseless, that is groundless. And so when you derive this is at a high level. You may say, I don't care. What does that mean? Who cares? If you take that and apply it all the way to the layers of oneness that we just described, this also applies in your day-to-day life. You will create false idols for yourself. You will worship others. If you are not worshiping God, you are worshiping someone else. You are worshiping yourself, as the Quran says. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you seen the one who takes his own whims and desires as his own God? And you worship others. You do as they say. You follow them. Because you don't have that ground. Nothing forces you to say, this is not real for me. Your sovereignty is not true. There's something missing here. You can't impose that on me. I know where I stand. I know what truth is and what is not. Once you know this, you become unshakable. You know exactly where you stand in life. You know exactly where you're going in life. No matter what happens, you're steadfast. And this is what the Quran is trying to do. This is the importance of Tawheed. Yes, there is a abstract, deep, religious, philosophical layer to it, and there's a very real, practical component to it in our day-to-day lives too. It makes it for a very different kind of human being to understand these notions of Tawheed and to found your worldview on whether there is God with everything that we derived out of God or not. So inshallah, this is done, and then we move to the first, after the beliefs. I'm done with the beliefs. I think we already spent too much time on it. So we'll move to the knowledge of the Holy Quran and the Hadith starting the next time, inshallah, that we meet. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. For those who still have energy, I'm happy to take questions.
says that he's not above down for the servant. So it says if he knows that Balaam is incorrect. So is our morals placed by him, or is he just directing us towards them? And if they're not placed by him, then what's the actual source of morals? And if they are placed by him, can he just decide overnight that actually no, murder is actually a good thing, for example?
Okay, excellent question. So where does our morality come from? And with the examples that you mentioned for God, the question you asked is basically a summary, I'm going to say, of half of the problems between the two biggest halves of Islamic schools, Al-Mu'tazila and Al-Asha'ira. This is their main contention. I'm going to say more than half of their problem is answering this question. Right? So the Asha'ira said that our morality comes from God, and the Mu'tazila said that morality exists outside of God and is binding to God and to us. Does morality exist outside of us? Yes. Morality exists outside of us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to abide by that morality. That morality comes from the type of world we live in. Can God do anything differently than He does? Yes. So this is an insistence from God when He says, for instance, وَمَا رَبُّكَ بِظَلَّامٍ لِلْعَبِيدِ, and so on and so forth. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us that He promises to act in a specific way, but also saying He doesn't need to. And there are verses in the Quran that say that, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون. No one is going to ask God, were you allowed to do this? Like how can you ask God that? What does it mean that God is doing like He's supposed to or not? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about Himself, كتب على نفسه. I have imposed upon myself Ar-Rahmah, for instance, or that I will always be just and much more than just. And that's why He says Rahmah. He doesn't say كتب على نفسه العدل, right? He says Ar-Rahmah because, as the Quran says, if He wanted to be just, then ما ترك عليها من دابة, right? لو يؤاخذ الله الناس بما ظلموا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that, can He do other than what He does? Yes, He can. But He will always act in a way that we recognize to be the truth, that is just and that is right. Can we act differently? Yes, we can. But we recognize, we have the knowledge and the ability to understand that this is right and this is wrong. Is it entirely from God? So here we have to do the distinction between legislation and existential, right? We have to say, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for instance, says, I don't know, to pray Salat al-Subuh is a good thing. To play Salat al-Fajr is a good thing. Versus the example you used, don't kill. Are these at the same level of good and bad or same level of morality? No. Human beings have an ability to understand good and bad, morality. The details and how the instances apply, we may not have. And so this is where religion comes and fills that for you. Logically, with everything we said, we should conclude, every human being should conclude, I should worship God. I should serve God. And then it should stop here. How do I worship God? You can come up with a way that you rationally can justify as this is the right way to worship God. And I will come up with another way. Or God tells me how to worship Him. Religion. Everything else, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. You have been inspired, you have been given a soul that has been inspired with knowing فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. What is good for it, what is bad for it. What leads to its fujur, decadence, and a life of sin and a life of, or taqwa. That's from within you. You're wired that way. You come into this world wired. You should be able to recognize that. Does it mean that everybody is going to have the same ability to see this as the truth? No. And that's why the Quran continues. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. So therefore, the Quran is saying, so therefore, the one who purifies it has become successful because they will better see فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. And the other person, وَقَدْ خَابَ And the person who has buried it, قَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا, will be a loser. The one who has buried that soul. And Imam Ali alayhi salam, in that first sermon, in another part, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent His prophets to humanity so that يَسْتَخْرِجُوا دَفَائِنَ عُقُولِهِمْ, right? So that they allow them to unearth that which has been buried in their intellects. It's there, but if you're living a life of distraction, a life of sin, a life that takes you away from your ability to focus on these things and see them for what they are, you won't be able to see it. So now you have to work on tazkiyah, aflaha man zakkaha, so that you can see. Yeah, I think I touched on all the points in your question. Allah yakhallikum. Tafadhal Ali.
Sayid, you mentioned we're talking about worldviews, that if you have a non-theocentric worldview, you necessarily have a materialistic worldview.
Yeah.
And there's no in between. So, in other words, to say that if you have an atheistic worldview, then you necessarily have a materialistic worldview. But we know that there's people who, for example, believe in a holy characteristic of nature, who believe in karma, who believe in some sort of balance in the world. These are non-material things. So can you say that they fit in somewhere in between?
Absolutely. Excellent question. Yes, I bluntly and controversially and in an extreme way said that there are only two worldviews. And this is exactly to have that type of reaction and to force that type of thinking. What do we do with everything that is in between? I would say usually, you mentioned a few examples, you're going to have to fit it in one or the other. Because ultimately it has to. And so the examples you said to me would fall in the theocentric worldview with huge problems. So this is where we go to, I don't know if the slide still shows, we go to this slide. That while you believe in God, so it's a theocentric worldview, or you believe in your definition of God, so the universe with all of its powers, pantheism, or whatever you believe in, but it goes way beyond matter, right? And there is a will, and there is a life, and there is a... Okay, so this is a theocentric worldview. But how you have defined God is where you have fallen in problems. And so this is why I say that it's not only that you believe in God or not. What's your definition of God? Now, you may not call it God. You might call it something else. You may call it the universe, or the intelligence, or the spirit, or the soul, or the energy, or the... Okay, define that for me. And this is where you have to, working with people, you will see that the issue is we have to start from the beginning. So let's have a discussion on the essence of what you believe in. What about its attributes? What about its characteristics? And you will see that this is where you are able to start identifying the mistakes. Intellectual, logical, philosophical mistakes in their thinking, once rectified, will come back to this. Like my claim is, there is no other way to create a coherent system. And I believe this is directly in the Quran. لو كان فيهما آلهة غير الله لفسدتا is not only saying this is how it is in reality, it's also how it is in our minds. That this system would not work. It would be a corrupt system, a corrupted system. Reality does not work unless you have this specific system. And in a very impolite way of me to say, it would be unfair of God to create a system that logically can lead to anything but that. That He would create a system that could potentially have me reach a conclusion that is logically valid, that He is not the only God of this world. If He creates a world where that's logical, it's not very fair of Him. Where a human being can truly have proper thinking, valid thinking in every step of the way, and be able to conclude that anything different than reality. If that's possible, then that's why I say it's impolite of me to say, but it would not be very fair of God to do it that way. I don't know if that point is clear. Hassan. تفضل. عليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
By worshiping God in the way He has asked you to worship, we are allowed
Yes, so worshiping God is basically being in alignment with the system that God has created. So I said this after I presented all the layers of the oneness of God, believing in the oneness of God. So after you believe in His essence, you believe in His attributes, you believe in the oneness of His action and agency, you start to move towards the sovereignty, the lordship of God, and then the sovereignty of God. This is when we start to get into the detailed discussion. So it starts with tashri'. So God alone is the one who is validly, legitimately allowed to say do and don't do. That's on His side. And therefore on our side, this produces what we call tawheed al-ta'a and tawheed al-ibadah. That therefore He alone is worthy of being accepted in worship and in obedience. So by the time I get to my worship, this is after I realize how God has created this world with everything in it, with all the systems in it, and so on and so forth. So I don't start with this point. I can't start with this point. I don't live in a vacuum, and my worship of God is not in emptiness. It's not in a vacuum. It's part of a system. Therefore, this logic forces me to see that all I'm doing when I'm worshiping God is realigning myself with the order that God has created. Okay? And this order has, at every layer, every time I peel a layer and I see the manifestation of the oneness of God, the tawheed of God through it, I see that my worship is going to align with that all the way back to, this is because of His oneness at the level of the essence. Right? So everything that I see, that I witness, that I experience in this world, but way beyond, is completely in alignment with, therefore I have to worship Him in this way. If I want to go in more detail, I have to worship Him in this way to realign with the occurrences, the instances of what exists in this world too. Every atom, every planet, every galaxy, every system, every principle, every law, so long as we believe these laws are truth, right? If it's science, then who knows? Maybe in the future they will be further adjusted, further modified. Whatever is the truth, I believe that if God is telling me, therefore do this, He's only asking me to align myself willingly with the alignment that He has already put in everything else that is not willingly. Right? The way everything else works, take as an example, the way the atom works, assuming that it is not out of will, to us it doesn't look like it's a matter of will. The Quran says that everything was given, presented with the option of accepting a covenant, and everything rejected it, including the heavens and the earth. But the human being accepted that covenant. What is that covenant? How are we different than everything else? We're different in our free will, and how much free will we have compared to everything else. The forces of electromagnetism apply in a way that wherever we look in the world, we see that nothing changes. They apply in the same exact way. Gravity works in the same exact way, assuming gravity is the way it is being presented today. And so on and so forth. The only difference when I look at the world is myself. That I may decide to act however I want. Everything else looks like it is acting exactly in the way that it's supposed to be acting. Including myself and everything in my body. Everything is acting the way it's supposed to, no matter where I look. And we also think the Holy Quran is referring to this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, look at the creation of God. فَارْجِعِ الْبَصَرِ. Look at the creation of God. Do you see any problems with it? Do you see any cracks? Do you see any contradictions? Do you see any weakness in it? No. The Quran, the next verse says, ثُمَّ ارْجِعِ الْبَصَرَ كَرَّتَيْنِ. No, look again. And look yet one more time. Like, look very thoroughly. Maybe you're going to find something. Do you see anything that is not working the way it's supposed to? No. Except you. Why? Because you have the freedom. You choose. Do I act in a specific way or in a different way? Do I align with everything else or not? That's what we meant by the alignment. تفضلوا. عليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
Talked a little bit about how we can unknowingly create false idols. And so this kind of this, I want to get the question in direction of which would you sort of help categorize as acceptable and problematic ones? There would be like two areas where I would like categorize situations that I would see myself falling into, for example. So one being like not having the full view. For example, I'm waking up today so I can successfully do well in the exams that are coming up. So I can get a degree in the end, so I can get a job. Like I'm not looking at the far objective. And the other being maybe like everything I'm doing is so that I can earn money, I can have a good car, I can have a good status. So would you say those fall in the same category as creating false idols? And is God consciousness a criteria for Islam or Christianity?
أحسنتم. So let me start with the first question, and then I'll ask you to elaborate a little bit on the second question. For the first question, you gave the example of someone, for instance, who is working to be successful in this world, not looking at the higher objectives. How does that fit in to, for instance, the discussion we just had on having false idols and so on and so forth? This is where the reason why we talked a little bit about this topic last week of Islam and Iman. And we said that while Islam is a not very deep layer in our religion, the outward superficial understanding of our religion, you do as you're told and you check it off. Whereas Iman and belief is not only very deep, we believe that it's infinite. How much progress you can do, just how high you can soar with belief, how deep you can go in belief is unlimited. Everything, the things that you mentioned are things that are actions that are linked to knowledge. And your knowledge and belief are what's going on inside of you. There are people that this is their level of understanding and their level of knowledge. If truly your level of belief and understanding and knowledge is simply that, you live your life, you pray your prayers, you do your fast, you recite a bit of Quran, you perform your pilgrimage, and the rest of your life is simply meant to, live a worldly life like everybody else lives their worldly life. This would be the outcome. This is a direct product of your level of knowledge and Iman. And someone who, like you are reacting now, is having questions about this, is already an indication that your level of knowledge and Iman is higher than thinking that this is sufficient. And that's why you say, I'm not looking at the far objective, the high objective, I'm looking at the immediate. And in the immediate, this is what I'm doing day to day. Is there anything wrong with this? Depending on your level of Iman, the answer is going to be yes or no. Your level of Iman, the higher up it goes, the more your aim should be the higher objective. Which does not exclude living the best life you live. The only thing that changes is your intention. When you wake up in the morning and you want to make money and you want to have a good car and you want to be successful at work, is there a way for you to re-intent that, to shift your intention so that these things are, as they call, the proximal, the close to you objectives, but that your eyes and your attention is starting to focus on the higher objectives. How does this feed into the higher objective? And there is a way for all of this to feed into the higher objective. There is nothing wrong with any of this, except if it is all a distraction. Right? And this is not, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to me. I'm talking to all of us and anyone else. The issue is not in any of these things in themselves. The issue is, to what extent are these things becoming the distraction from the higher objective? If you are able to continuously bring yourself back to the higher objective, there is nothing wrong with any of this. But you can see where your attention is shifting. Are you only looking at this job as the end? Or this is the means to a greater end? And this applies to the smallest things in our lives and the big decisions in our lives. From, what I'm going to eat next and how I'm going to sit and when I'm going to sleep and so on and so forth, to what will my career look like and who do I marry and how do I spend the rest of my life. Same. It's all about the intent, the higher intent behind the small actions and the small decisions. The question cannot just be, this person drives a very nice car. This person has an amazing job. This person makes a lot of money. That person doesn't drive a good car and does not have a good job, does not have a nice house, does not have a lot of money. That by itself on its own means nothing. Absolutely nothing. It doesn't tell me anything about the intent behind any of this, the circumstances that led to this, or how this person is using whatever circumstances they're in to move to the highest level, to the higher objectives. I gave a convoluted, abstract answer. Is it clear?
Yeah, it is. I would just ask maybe for a little bit of elaboration on the idea of how we actually do create false idols in our lives, and some maybe examples, what we would consider that and what we would just consider a byproduct of the daily things we have to do from there.
Yeah, so examples of creating false idols. The idol is, if I bring it to the discussion that I just had, if there is anything that imposes on you a certain way of living, and based on the discussion that we just had, it does not have true legitimacy, it falls somewhere under the false idols. If it may have a legitimacy that you don't recognize as being a legitimacy you follow, it has a social legitimacy. Okay, that's a factor. All of society agrees that, I don't know, there's a certification required to become an engineer and I want to become an engineer. Is there something legitimate here? Yes. Is it derived out of my belief in the divine? No. Okay, but there is a recognition that there's a social order and there's nothing wrong with that and I'm working within that. Nothing wrong with that. If this becomes my be-all, end-all and the end of my belief, yes, I'm making this into an idol. This is not an idol. I'm using a silly example, but I'm trying to make it real based on the things that you just said. Of course, this becomes a lot more problematic the moment we start to introduce things that touch values, ethics, morality, how I behave, how I decide in the world. Where does this come from? Is it coming from other people like me? Do they have legitimacy? What do they represent? Is it myself? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want that. He wants Him to be the only source. Right? So when I'm telling you, for instance, the social order, there's nothing wrong with it. Am I doing that for myself? No. Because my religion tells me, God tells me that the social order by itself is valid. So long as it is not doing anything wrong, social order is good. Money, wealth, success, reputation, all of it, amazing, good. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, who is it that prohibited the good things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created? Right? قُلْ مَنْ حَرَّمَ زِينَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, there's nothing wrong with any of this. This is not making it into an idol. Why not? Live the best life you can live. No issue at all. But where's your attachment? Are you relying on, are you dependent on, not in the monetary sense, in the spiritual sense? To what extent does this represent who you are? To what extent is this occupying your heart and your soul? This should be external circumstances. No issue with that. And this opens the door to a completely different discussion But we see that a lot in our religion because you talked about this, so I mention it quickly. So therefore, why do we see this constant insistence and reminder, prophets, saints, imams, who are poor, who live difficult lives? It seems out of choice. And we see that a lot in our scholars too. And many of them, okay, that's their circumstances. Others, it's by choice. Why? Because many of them think that it becomes a slippery slope. Once I open that door, I don't know how far I will keep going. How much time and effort and energy and love and heart from me this is going to take away from the things that I should perhaps care about a lot more. Right? And they become distractions. I don't want the distractions. So I close the door. And this is my discipline. I know what I'm disciplined about and what I'm not disciplined about. I work in an office and there are people who don't mind having chocolates outside of their doors because they have very good discipline. They're not interested in sweets. They're interested in chips and salty things. If you put those in front of them, they have no discipline. And other people are the opposite. So they don't want to see them in front of them because they feel like if it's there, they're going to be weak and they're going to keep grabbing the chocolates. Silly example, but this is exactly the same. We need to know who we are. I need to know what is too much of a distraction for me personally away from God, away from the ultimate goals. And this is where it becomes a slippery slope. Right? So in any case, inshallah, I answered that question. Your second question had to do with God consciousness. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by how can we build greater God consciousness?
Well, I think the idea was that whether God-centric objectives in everything I do is a requirement in Islam or in Iman, or no, or both, no, one or the other, or neither. Whether
So God consciousness in everything that I do.
yeah, consciousness of God-centricness in
Yeah. Is it? No, absolutely not. But this is at the lowest level of Iman. It is not. The higher aim you have in Iman, the more God is supposed to be present to you at all times. Right? And there are many, many things to say here. I'll just use one example. There is a discussion that we have in the narrations, if I remember, between Abu Dhar and Salman, mentioned in the ahadith. And Salman asks Abu Dhar, how often do you think about death? Or, this is not how he asks it, this is my way of simplifying what he says. He tells him, what is your hope in life? So how long do you think you will live? When you make decisions, how far is your aim? To use a bit of the same wording you used. How far does your hope go? How long will you stay alive for? And therefore you make decisions based on that. So Abu Dhar told him, when I wake up in the morning, I have no hope that I will end the day. And when I sleep at night, I have no hope that I will wake up in the morning. That alone is enough, right, for us to think about. But then Abu Dhar asked Salman, and what about you, Salman? What is your hope in life? And Salman said, when the breath goes up, I have no hope that it goes down. And when the breath goes down, I don't have hope that it goes back up. This is the difference, one. And that's why we say Salman is at the highest level of faith of all the companions. But two, this is also an indication of how God is present in the life of this person. We don't think any of the two are exaggerating. We think that they are saying the truth. Okay, and this is an extremely high level of Iman. But there is a way for a human being to live in constant remembrance of God. God consciousness at all times. If you do not Are you, missing out? Yes. Because there's always more. Why are they achieving that level and you are not? Are you in sin? No, it's not a sin. You're missing out. Is it haram? Is it forbidden? No. But this does not come by itself. I can't just flick on a switch tonight and say, from now on, God will be present in everything that I do. No, this is a direct outcome of my knowledge and my iman. This is the natural conclusion of that. This is a natural product of that. And that's why the more I work on those, the more that will happen by itself. Inshallah, that was the answer now. Allah khalikum. There was a question here. Was there? No. I apologize. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. الله يخليكم.